Stand up.
Hi there, how are you? Thanks for pressing play. I've got an awesome conversation with award-winning, best-selling author, political analyst, documentary filmmaker, columnist, television producer, radio host, Jonathan Alter, joining me on today's show. You're going to love it. But as I said yesterday, and I'll be saying all week, taking a little bit lighter schedule this week, posting tons of interviews and lots of content, but not spending the 2 to 5 hours that I do on the opening news segment this week, because it is, well, a different kind of week. Tonight, my daughter graduated high school. That's right, Ava, 18 years old, graduated from high school. She is now, in a few weeks, off to camp where she's a counselor for a month, along with her sister, which is going to be great for them. And then it's off to Ithaca College for Ava. But we've come to the end of our time here, and it's crazy. Nobody told me that she was going to grow up and then she was going to move out and want to go to college. None of you told me that. No one told me that this was going to go by so fast. I'm kidding. People told me those kind of things every day. And I'm real proud of Ava, of course, for everything that she's accomplished in her life, and I'm sure everything else that she will accomplish, but I'm also feeling real good about us, and personally, I stayed the moment. I was right here the whole time, Ave. I tried not to spend too much time longing for the past when you were little and I was carrying you in a baby Bjorn on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And I certainly don't want to spend too much time thinking about the future because, kiddo, all we got is right here, right now. And nothing in my life makes me prouder than to be your dad. So there you go. You've graduated high school. Apparently, you're going to be moving out. And I am looking for advice for everybody listening as to how the hell I'm supposed to handle life without you. So many of you have already gone through this. I've been talking to you about dreading this to some extent. And I know this is a transition period for me, for us, and obviously, most importantly, for Ava. Some of you have been listening for almost her entire life. Crazy to think of it. But you're like family to me, and I appreciate all of your support along the ride. And, of course, we still have Julia. She's got 3 more years of high school here. So she becomes the final project. And, well, really, there's nothing much left to do but watch because she's exciting. They both are. So proud of them. We did a good job, Val. And now it's time to get to my guest. Like I said, not covering the news, nothing about Trump incriminating himself further on a Fox News interview or the fact that I'm never voluntarily going to go undersea in a submersible. Certainly not going to talk about Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito writing an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, which strangely hosts just about anybody outside of Magneto to write anything they want. Certainly not going to talk about him trying to preempt a ProPublica investigation, proving that he too hangs out with billionaires. Not going to mention any of those things because I want to get right to my conversation with Jonathan Alter, and I want to act like I'm not paying attention to the news so I don't have to cover it here. You get a break from it as well. I mean, I'm sure you're not taking a break from it. You're probably watching, paying attention, and knowing everything that's happening. But maybe you should. Maybe we all should. So let's talk about what all the news means with Jonathan Alter. Had a great conversation with him about the passing of Daniel Ellsberg, who he knew, talked about the outcome of the debt ceiling. And Jonathan Alter knows RFK Jr., has talked to him several times, went to college with him. So we talk a lot about that and more. There's nothing that he hasn't done in political journalism. He's a historian. He's interviewed 9 of the last 10 presidents, either before, during, or after their presidencies. Worked for Newsweek for years, wrote more than 50 cover stories for Newsweek. And Jonathan and I go way back. His wife and I, Emily, worked together at the Colbert Report. I know all 3 of his kids pretty well. Of course, his daughter, Alter. Charlotte Alter is very respected young journalist now working for Time Magazine. His son, Tommy Alter, is on one of the hit podcast YouTube channels with NBA basketball star JJ Redick. So they're doing really great. And I'm really excited to have Jonathan joining me in today's conversation. I think you're going to love it. Say hi to him on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and everywhere else. Get his books, read his articles. Let's do it right now with one of the best in the game, Jonathan Alter.
Yeah,
awesome.
Let's go for it.
Huh?
Let's go. Yeah, let's do it.
Here we go. Recording. And I've just talked all about you and your work and your books and your Substack, and then I hit record, and there he is, one of the brightest, one of the kindest, one of the smartest, Jonathan Alter.
joining me. How come you aren't a PhD? Did you ever think of getting your PhD in something like history or something?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Pete. I'm sorry I didn't shave.
You look great. I like the little grizzle.
So, it's an interesting question. When I was in college, I didn't really work in subjects I wasn't interested in, but I was very, very interested in history. And I got really into writing my senior thesis, which was about the war in Vietnam. And I thought briefly about maybe becoming a grad student, which would have been, eventually either a master's or eventually a PhD. And then I just wanted to get on with my life. And I kind of knew some sad sack PhD candidates, and it just didn't seem as exciting as journalism would be. So I passed. But I actually did think about it a little bit.
I love that story. And it also brings us to the thesis on Vietnam. I saw you tweeting about Daniel Ellsberg, who just passed away. And I wanted to ask you about him and his significance to the ending of the Vietnam War. What are your thoughts on him and his life and what he did?
He was a hugely important figure in the last now more than 50 years of American history. So just very briefly, he had been a brilliant student. He worked for Robert McNamara in the Pentagon, and he was one of a group of about 35 who was asked to write a history of the Vietnam War called the Pentagon Papers. And so he did that in the late 60s. And then he got, after serving in Vietnam and serving at a relatively high level in the Pentagon and being all in, he had a moment of conscience, and he realized that the whole thing was a disaster. And so in 1971, when he was working at the Rand Corporation, which had access to the Pentagon Papers, he copied them, and eventually they came into possession of the New York Times and then the Washington Post. And the Nixon administration went crazy. And first they tried to restrain the Times and the Post from publishing it. And there was a famous Supreme Court decision which did a lot for the press freedom of this country. And the Supreme Court ruled that the Times and the Post had the right to publish this secret report in the public interest, and that for the Nixon administration to prevent them from publishing was unconstitutional, a violation of the First Amendment. And this is extremely important because it's in dictatorships that they have what's called prior restraint, like telling you what you can't publish.
Right.
And we don't have that in this country because of the Pentagon Papers case. And the only reason we know about the Pentagon Papers is because of Daniel Ellsberg. And then what happened is Nixon got so freaked out that these government documents would reveal that he, as a candidate in 1968, had intervened in the Paris peace talks in a really sleazy way to basically torpedo those talks and thereby hurt Vice President Hubert Humphrey's chances of beating him in the 1968 election. So Nixon was worried that Ellsberg had more documents, that this would come out. And so after getting hepped up by Haldeman and Ehrlichman, he basically went to war with Ellsberg. And by this time, this is before the Watergate break-in, he authorizes what became known as the Plumbers. And there's a show on TV right now called White House Plumbers. And one of their first operations of the Plumbers, and they were supposed to be plugging leaks, and Daniel Ellsberg was the big whistleblower, the big leaker. And one of their first operations was to break into Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office to see if they could dig up some dirt.
Unbelievable.
And this was a black bag operation. This was, people from the government breaking and entering into, his name was Dr. Lewis Fielding's office. And they didn't find anything. And it eventually came out. And then, this plumbers unit eventually got involved in Watergate. And when the whole Watergate scandal unfolded in 1973 and 74, the burglary of Ellsberg's office was an important part of the scandal. It didn't relate to the Watergate break-in, but it was another part of what became known as Watergate. Watergate was not just about the break-in at Watergate.
And the reason Nixon wanted them to get Ellsberg's psychiatry records to paint him as mentally ill.
Correct.
To say he's crazy.
Anything they could use on him. So, when we get very concerned about Trump, and we're right to be, it's important to be reminded that all of this happened. And then Ellsberg became a anti-nuclear activist, and he later released other documents that showed quite recently that there were people in the Eisenhower administration who wanted to nuke Shanghai over their Taiwan dispute.
Wow.
And he became arguably, the most important whistleblower in American history. And it was done out of conscience, and this moral conscience. And this, I think, is the important thing to understand about Daniel Ellsberg's legacy. He wasn't doing it because he wanted to be a big man. Some people leak because they like to see what they leaked in the paper and they feel important, or they leak to stab somebody in the back by making them look bad with what they leak. This was a major leak for the right reasons. Moral conscience.
I love hearing you talk about him. I think he's such an important American, and that was such an important time in history, and you're such a great historian, so I'm glad we got to talk about that. Let's go to just recent history. A couple of weeks ago, you wrote about the conclusion of the debt ceiling negotiations. You can put that into historical perspective if you want as well, but what do you think are some of the most important takeaways for what that deal meant for both Kevin McCarthy, House Republicans, and their movement, and obviously the Biden administration, and most importantly, the public's interest?
Well, the first is the public interest, and that's a global question, because if we had defaulted and there were a number of Republicans who were ready to go over the cliff, the consequences for literally everybody in the world would have been very serious,
right?
Because so much of the world is connected to the American economy, and so we would have had a global meltdown for no reason, because there's this idiotic American political tradition of requiring people to vote to raise the debt ceiling and basically pay their bills. It's like, if you run up money on a credit card, it's like saying, well, you have to have a vote on whether to pay what you've already, bought. And this was not about future spending. It was about spending that we've done in the past. So it was ridiculous on its face that not for the first time we were having a crisis over this. But, Biden didn't have the votes in late 2021 when we had, or late 2022 when Democrats had control of both chambers. Because of Joe Manchin and some other people, he didn't have enough votes to ram through the debt ceiling crisis, the debt ceiling deal at that point. So then he had to eventually enter into negotiations with Kevin McCarthy's people on this after a long time of resisting it. And one of the things I found, because I got closer to this story without revealing to you who my source was, really, than either the New York Times or the Washington Post did.
Yeah, how?
Well, I probably can't say.
One of your powerful friends.
Let's just say somebody that I know who was extraordinarily well informed about what happened.
Can I guess who it was?
No, because I'm not going to play that game with you.
No. It would be fun to play.
No, because,
All right. Anyway,
then that just
a lot
gets
of fun,
into
Jonathan. Go ahead, though.
Reporter source stuff. You know better than that, Pete. So
Good try.
It looked like, why did Biden flip-flop after saying he wasn't going to go into talks with them, and then he did, right? And so we're going, oh, typical Biden. He said he wasn't going to negotiate with these crazy people, and then he did. But actually, that was all planned, because they realized if they could give McCarthy a win on just the fact that he got the White House to the table, that they would then have more leverage on what happened at the table.
Right.
Where they just cleaned the clock of the Republicans. I mean, the reason I wrote about it and wanted to find out what happened is I was just stunned by what a victory it was for the Democrats. And I thought it was going to be so much worse. And basically, the Republicans got almost nothing of what they wanted in this deal. So it was, to my mind, a huge victory for Biden, but they didn't want to gloat about it because, as we've seen, there are consequences for McCarthy. And I don't think they really, while the Democrats are happy to see the Republicans squabbling among themselves, and it's not like anything big was going to come out of the House anyway, it's not really good for the stability of government to have, your speaker in a constant state of crisis. So I understand why Biden didn't want to gloat over it, but he won big time. And we can get into the sheep dip, into the weeds on it if you want to.
Sheep dip, is that an old goats term?
No, that's an old news magazine term. When
I did not ever work
into the weeds. It's sort of a more fun way of getting down in the weeds.
I'm conscious of our time and that you have a life and a grandchild, so I want to ask you about two other big stories that you've written about without getting into the sheep dip on that one, and for another time for sure. But
I do in my column on Old Goats. If people are interested, I explain exactly what Democrats won and Republicans lost, and how even, some of the Democratic concessions, like on the IRS, for instance, are really no big deal.
Yeah, really great piece. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was thinking, do I go back and talk about this debt ceiling? And then I read your piece, which I thought was unique and apparently well-sourced, although we will never know who it is because he's an old-school journalist.
On food stamps, and this got no attention at all. I'm going to just get out of the sheep dip in a second. But, there was this seeming loss where they lowered the age of people excluded from having to at least seek work or work a little bit in order to get food stamps. And so that was seen as, even though it used to be anybody under 65 had to do this, the fact that it got lowered, I think it was from 55 to 52. So if you're between 52 and 55, you have to work. If you don't have any dependents, single person trying to get food stamps, you have to do some work. There are a lot of jobs available. But the good news is that in exchange for that concession, because the Republicans were first trying to make Medicaid recipients work, which was unbelievably cruel, to take people who are sick and say, all right, you have to go to work.
Or even if they're not sick, you don't qualify for health insurance. Just exactly. Insurance.
Exactly. But just really quickly, because I know you want to talk about other stuff. So in exchange for making this concession on the age of exclusion, they basically did a lot. The Democrats were able to expand food stamps for the homeless and for veterans, so that they don't have to renew their application, which if you have certain executive function problems that have helped make you homeless, the idea of not having to reapply every 6 months for food stamps, huge win for progressive ideas of decency that didn't get noticed at all.
Yeah, it's real hard to apply for anything from a magazine subscription to government benefits if you are homeless and don't have an address.
Correct. And this basically took care of that problem, which is a big win, which the White House didn't want to gloat about because it's human decency that the Republicans were against. But they got that.
Yeah, every anti-poverty group I've worked with, and there's been a few, talks about, that are on the ground trying to work with folks that are mentally ill, that are homeless, that are addicted, any number of these issues or all of them, talks about the difficulty of enrolling them in the programs because they don't have a permanent address. And this kind of thing goes to solve it and streamline it, which is really a major impact for organizations and for individuals who are dealing with that, I think. We'll see. I want to learn more about it. Okay, so RFK Jr., I want to talk with him about you with him because you actually know the man. And I don't know if you saw this yesterday, but he, Joe Rogan, and Elon Musk piled on my friend Dr. Peter Hotez, the vaccine scientist. Yeah. And even if you didn't know that, you know about RFK's history with the craziest of conspiracy theories, now many of which started at this point with Alex Jones. So they're on the same plane, I think. It's just that he's RFK. What is your relationship with him? You went to college with him at Harvard?
Yeah, I was behind him at Harvard, and I didn't know him well. Saw him some in recent years. I know a lot of people in his family. After I wrote my pretty vicious hatchet job about him on Old Goats, I got calls from two members of the Kennedy family. I can't say who they were because it's up to them to decide when to go public, but they're very, very unhappy with RFK Jr. For a lot of good reasons, and they were glad that I wrote the piece. I've been kind of disappointed that there haven't been more people who have taken a hard look at him. He has blood on his hands. I mean, the thing that people forget, all right, so we lost 1 million people to COVID. Right? That's a lot of Americans. It's almost like we flushed that down the memory hole. And there were quite a number of them who died because they believed bullshit that they read from people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., that they should not get a vaccination.
Yeah, there's some good research that puts that number around 200,000 Americans.
Yeah, so I don't think we'll ever know exactly how many it was, but it was a substantial number of people. And they would come back, the anti-vaxxers would come back with this argument, oh, well, people who got vaccinated, they got COVID afterward. I did twice. I've gotten it since I've been vaccinated with boosters. But I'm alive, right? So if you get vaccinated, you don't die. Slight detail, right? Slight detail. You don't actually die if you get the vaccination. So anybody who did anything to undermine faith in this vaccination, and they would usually do it Tucker Carlson style. This is what Bobby Kennedy did. Oh, I'm just raising questions.
Right.
I'm not an anti-vaxxer. Right. I'm just raising questions about the safety of the vaccine. Just raising questions. And that's the dodge that they use. And that's what he's saying now in New Hampshire. Oh, no, I'm not a crazy person. Yeah, actually is kind of crazy, but you have to know him and know his full history to recognize that. But he's able to kind of get by saying, oh, no, I'm not a crazy anti-vaxxer. I just raised questions. And he now downplays that because he doesn't want people holding him accountable. In the meantime, this real Anthony Fauci book that he wrote, not just completely unfairly trashed Fauci, making it seem like he was profiting off of these vaccines, profiting off of all it's like he was a greedy pig, which could not be further from the truth. People will say, well, he was, paid more than Biden. Yeah, because he's been in the federal government for so long that, you get raises and whatever. The National Institute of Health compensates their doctors well, as they should. but he's not getting rich off of this, and that was insane. And then Kennedy would quote really crazy people, just saying, I'm just quoting them, saying basically that Fauci had experimented on children, even talking about a cemetery in Philadelphia full of Fauci's victims. And then while he was at it, he trashes Bill Gates for what he's done in Africa. This is Bobby Kennedy in his book, when actually the efforts of the Gates Foundation have extended lifespan in sub-Saharan Africa by 12 years, not 12 months, 12 years as a result of what they have done in Africa. And so to get people thinking that, Anthony Fauci and Bill Gates are menaces, and he says much nastier things about them than menace.
He says they have blood on their hands.
Yes. And so the idea that 20% of Democrats in some polls are saying they're for him is just super depressing to me. And it's depressing to me that the press hasn't done more to
he's being run just
his family, by the way, will come out against him. They're just waiting for the right timing. So
you write, and you know his family, and you write, I've heard from good sources that he may get #MeToo'd. For many years, Kennedy was a notoriously manipulative sex addict and chronic adulterer. He rated his partners on a 1 to 10 scale in his journal, which fell into the hands of his mentally ill second wife, Mary Richardson. After he filed for divorce and Richardson committed suicide in 2012, her family sued Kennedy for moving her remains to a Kennedy plot, then moving them again. To describe the feelings of the Richardson family toward Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as angry would be a gross understatement. That's quite a paragraph filled with nuggets.
Yeah, and by the way, none of those are exclusive. You can read about all that in various newspaper accounts. But people have short memories. So what really worries me, Pete, is not that Bobby Kennedy Jr. is going to win the Democratic nomination. That's not going to happen, although he could win the New Hampshire primary because Biden is so unpopular in New Hampshire because he stripped them of their first-in-the-nation status. They like their primary, which they've had for more than 100 years, and it brings in a lot of tourism dollars. And Biden basically can't win the New Hampshire.
And the Kennedy name in the Boston market, which extends into New Hampshire, I think you wrote
right.
is...
And even though he doesn't live in Boston, he's never lived in Boston. He announced his campaign there. Kennedy did. But what worries me is there's no way this guy will ever endorse Joe Biden. So let's say he ends up with 5% of the Democratic vote by the time of next summer's convention. He will say to those 5%, don't vote for Biden. He'll probably have to say don't vote for Trump either. But you're talking about a certain chunk, 10% of the Democratic Party, who will be told by the candidate they supported not to support Joe Biden. In a close election, that could give us another 4 years of Trump. Then he'd have a lot more blood on his hands.
Before I let you go on that terrifying concept, what about Trump and the most recent indictment and his future legal problems through the summer? I mean, Jack Smith is doing a real slam dunk number on him. Former cabinet members, more and more coming out and just destroying him in major mainstream media, including obviously Bill Barr. You see Chris Christie out there. I wonder if something, to some extent, anything is changing. What with all these indictments and potential future indictments? Yeah.
So the only constant in American politics is the unexpected. So things could change. I was glad to see that Chris Christie is moving up in the polls. I don't think he can get the nomination, but I could be wrong. And a lot can happen. And there were a few things. Let me just quickly go over what I write about in Old Goats this week, which is the good things and the bad things coming out of this indictment and arraignment. The good things include the fact that, they were expecting as many as 30,000 people in the streets of Miami, and they put out the call, all the Trumpsters put out the call, come to Miami. Basically, a few hundred people went. And there is no Trump army. And so...
And of those few hundred, there was little to no violence that I heard reported.
Yeah, people don't want to get arrested because of their support for Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And they saw what happened to the January 6th insurrectionists. So the idea of street violence, widespread street violence in this country from Trumpsters, which has concerned a lot of people, including me, in the last couple of years, I think that threat is receding. And that's a really good thing. We're going to have lone wolf crazies who do crazy things after being inspired by Trump. But we don't have to worry about, civil war in the streets. That's not.
You're not downplaying anything. I think you either tweeted or wrote about the synagogue in Pittsburgh and the fact that that guy has been held responsible. It's not like these lone wolf. They're really never lone wolf because they're radicalized by others. I don't love that term necessarily on the internet, and including Donald Trump with this guy. I think it's pretty clear.
Yeah, no, he was radicalized by Trump, and we're going to see more of that. And that's probably a semi-permanent part of our politics and American life and in our gun culture. A lot of people die, but I think the worry that there would be more insurrections on behalf of Trump is just not happening. And a lot of times it's hard for everybody to accept good news. And I see that as good news. The other thing is, you see these anchors on television say, Donald Trump, he raised $4 million in the 24 hours after Alvin Bragg indicted him, or he raised, I don't know how much, $10 million, after Jack Smith. That's nothing. That is nothing. He's not raising any money.
Because you put it in perspective in your piece, I think you need about $1 billion
more. I was being very conservative.
Maybe $2 billion, really.
Well, no, I think the best estimates are you need $1.3 to $1.5 billion to run for president now. And Trump in particular needs it because while he doesn't need it to get nominated, and he's still quite likely to be nominated, in part because of all these winner-take-all primaries in the Republican Party, and the number of the other primaries, you don't get any delegates if you get less than 20%. So even when it's not winner-take-all, he'll get the large share of the delegates. He doesn't need money to convince his base to come out and vote for him in the primaries. But he can't win a general election unless he brings large numbers of independents who have left him back by arguing, say that, he was a better president than Biden, or whatever his argument would be to independents. It will take a tremendous amount of money to make that argument. And he won't get the free media coverage that independents watch. They're not watching Fox, right? There's 130 million people who vote in presidential elections, and there's a few 100,000 or a couple million who watch Fox. So he has to get out into the people who don't pay much attention to politics, and that takes money. And he's not going to have that money. And so his ability to convince these independents, come back to me, I'm better than Joe Biden, I was a better president than Joe Biden, he's not going to have the money to drive that message. So I think we learned the fact that there was not this outpouring, people were not opening their wallets in large numbers for Donald Trump. And if they didn't after his indictment, they won't after his conviction either. So we've now got some experience with his ability to exploit these things. And it's true that he goes up in the polls, some among Republicans, when these things happen, because they rally around him. But in terms of actually returning to the White House, this wasn't good news. The good news for him and the bad news for all the rest of us is he hit the jackpot on the judge. So she was selected randomly, and he had a 1 in 5, 1 in 6 chance of getting Judge Eileen Cannon, who's totally biased in his favor, and
totally biased.
Came up aces, so he's got her, and she has a lot of legal weapons at her disposal to delay this case, to exclude evidence, and there's certain parts of it that can be appealed by Jack Smith, and there are other things that cannot be appealed. So if a judge delays a case to give the defense more time to prepare, that's not going to get reversed on appeal. There's not going to be an appellate court judge who goes, no, go to trial right now. So there's a lot of ways that she has to delay this trial until after the election. And I would bet, I could be wrong, but I would bet that we do not see Trump on trial for these charges before the 2024 election.
You pondered the idea that Judge Aileen Cannon may be doing all of this because she has aspiration to someday sit on the highest court of the land if Donald Trump gets reelected, that she's doing all these favors for him for a potential Supreme Court.
No, I raised that because a lot of people, Lawrence O'Donnell and others, have been raising it. I'm not inside her head. I don't know why she's biased in favor of Trump. It may be that she just likes him.
Yeah.
And again, this is totally speculative. She's Cuban American, and he enjoys tremendous support in that community. But it was crystal clear after the indictment, after the MarALago raid, that this judge was on Trump's side, and she got slam dunked twice by the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which has Trump-appointed judges on it. But
right.
Her reading of the law was so biased in favor of Trump that they slapped her down twice. If it had just been once, she could have got, all right, she was inexperienced, she did this thing,
yeah.
She got slapped down, but then she got slapped down again. And so, is it possible that she'll try to restore her reputation by being a decent judge in this case? Yes, it is possible. My friend Nick Ackerman, who I wrote a few pieces for the Daily Beast with in 2017 and 18.
Yeah, Nick, of course, is a legend.
He's a former Watergate prosecutor. He wrote an article in the Times saying he thinks that she's going to behave herself and that the conviction will have more credibility if it's done in her courtroom. I hope he's right. And maybe it'll end up being a blessing in disguise for the prosecution that they drew her as a judge, but I have my doubts. In the meantime, they do have a backup strategy.
Yeah.
The prosecution, which is to indict him a second time in New Jersey, my state, for things that he did at his mansion in Bedminster.
Yeah, if they're not going to get him here, they're going to get him there for doing the same thing in a different location.
Quite possible. If she's really dragging her feet and issuing these rulings that are not encouraging, then at that point they do have that as an insurance policy. Not to mention the January 6th case, which is coming up. And
well, yeah.
I think there are reasons to believe that Jack Smith will indict Trump in that case as well.
We started by talking about Daniel Ellsberg. I wanted to just get your take on, a word or two about the weight of what Donald Trump is accused of doing in terms of taking documents that are as serious as top secret government military documents can be. What about the fact that he took them and then was subpoenaed to return them and did not return them until the feds had to come into his house and what they found? What about how dangerous that was, or how unprecedented it was, not only for a former president, but for almost anybody in the military or government?
Well, it wasn't unprecedented because we didn't have rules about this until the Presidential Records Act of 1978, which, for anybody who's interested in that, I deal with it in my biography of Jimmy Carter. That was a Carter administration post-Watergate reform. The idea that the Trump people are arguing that it excuses them is, it's like backwards day or something. The statute is very explicit that, those records belong to the government, not to the former president. But if he had just taken them the way Mike Pence did and Joe Biden did, when you're packing, you're in a hurry, you're going to possibly take some documents that you shouldn't. But the difference is that when asked for them back, he said, no, they're mine, like a 9-year-old or a 2-year-old. Mine, they're mine, they're my boxes. Well, they weren't his boxes. And that's where his legal problem is, not that he took them in the first place. That can happen. It's that he did not return them when asked.
And that he also shared them. He shared them with people.
And that he shared them. And, what is scary to me is that MarALago is not secure. There have been 2 people arrested for possible espionage at MarALago. One, a Ukrainian Russian supporter who claimed she was a Rothschild. She thought that would go down well at MarALago, and it did for a while. She had her picture taken with Trump, but really she's tied up with Russian oligarchs. And the other, a Chinese national, who had all kinds of recording devices on her.
Yep.
That were seized on her person and in her hotel room when she was, hanging around at MarALago. And, it only cost $200,000 to join MarALago. And that's nothing for, a spy service, right? And you can have your people,
Well, the doors at MarALago were locked, Jonathan.
Yeah, but you forgot that bathrooms locked from the inside, not the outside. Right.
Well, you say at the end of the
Kevin McCarthy was just a total craven idiot about this. He said, "Well, the bathrooms were locked," and so a number of people pointed out, "Yeah, they're locked. They lock from the inside," and then not to mention all those documents, in other places, right next to a Xerox machine. I mean, literally right next to a Xerox, and. So for Republicans, it's really, and I really wish every reporter would ask every Republican, not just the presidential candidates, but the ones who are bobbing and weaving and saying, "Oh, this is overreach, this is selective prosecution." I don't care whether they're running for dog catcher. If they're saying this kind of thing, the reporters need to say to them, "Look, let me just ask you, in all honesty, are you telling me, Candidate X, that if Barack Obama had taken nuclear documents to Martha's Vineyard and he had not returned them when he was specifically asked over a year period to return the documents from Martha's Vineyard, are you telling me you would consider this selective prosecution?" Then they're going to go, what about Biden? What about Hillary? I'm asking you a question, Candidate X. The question is about Barack Obama, not about Hillary Clinton. You telling me your position would be the same if Barack Obama took these documents and didn't give them back? And they can't answer that frickin' question. They can't. And it's important to put them, these MAGA sympathetic Republicans, in that questioning box.
Yes.
As often as possible.
Yes. I love that. Yeah. I read that in your piece and I was trying to lead you to it. You beat me. And a great place to end it, because that's a great question. Man, always great talking to you and reading your Substack, oldgoats.substack.com. Let's do it again much sooner, pal. I really appreciate you and your time, as always.
Yeah, thanks. And you can read it for free, by the way.
Go get it, everybody. I'll link to it in the show notes.
Good talking to you, Pete.
There he goes, Jonathan Alter and his birds. You hear those birds? I should have mentioned these at his daughter's Brooklyn apartment, and they're watching the granddaughter. And great conversation. I really appreciated that. Jonathan Alter, go let him know you heard here on the show with his book, read his biography of Jimmy Carter, just amazing. And we'll talk to him again soon. That's all I've got for you right now. Look for a lot more coming this week. We've got a bunch of exciting conversations. J.R.J. Sexton, Tom Hartman. I'm going to be having this libertarian who I disagree with and everything, comedian Dave Smith I'm scheduled to talk to. Caught up with Megan Messerly of Politico to talk about policy and the rollback of Medicaid and more. There will be more still. Thanks for hanging with me. Thanks for signing up for a subscription. Thanks for your advice on what I'm supposed to do now that my daughter is flying the coop and everything else that you want to offer. It's welcome here. You're welcome here. You're never alone. You're a member of the stand-up community. John Carroll, take us away.
Wheels been leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You gotta stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw the land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.